So it's sort of a roundabout way, right? I mean, as in life, right? When you look backwards, it seems to make sense, but when you're moving forward, you're not always 100% sure exactly how you're getting where you're getting. So I think it begins early on because I have always felt deeply connected to the environment and always, was always interested in protecting the earth and cleaning up the earth. I can actually remember I went to high school in Lowell, at Lowell High School in San Francisco, and I started a green club and started recycling back in like the 80s. And so I've always had this tie to the environment, but I went through, I was interested in medicine, went into pediatrics because it is the best field. The children are amazing. It's just a wonderful community. And I was always also interested in international health. And during my pediatric residency at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, I was on the international health track. And I had the opportunity to study in Asia, actually. So for the very first time, I went to Asia and I worked in Laos. And I was in Vientiane. And I was part of their, just almost like part of their residency. I was with a volunteer NGO at the time called Health Frontiers that was sort of training pediatricians in the country. So I went in and was doing my pediatric training there, and I was on the infectious disease wards, and I happened to be there in monsoon season when there was a really large outbreak of dengue fever. And so I saw a lot of children get sick with dengue. I saw many children die of dengue. And when I went home, I thought, if I got some infectious disease training, I might actually be helpful in this sort of setting. And so I went back, I did my infectious disease training. And as part of infectious disease, I again knew I wanted to work in global health. And so at Case Western Reserve University, there was a Center for Global Health and Diseases. So I hooked up with a wonderful mentor named Charlie King, who was working in Kenya. And I started working on mosquito-borne viruses. At that time, and I still today, worked on a virus called Rift Valley fever virus. And so I started going to Kenya in 2005. And over my years there, I was studying these mosquito-borne infections. We started off, there wasn't very much known about these infections and where we were working in Kenya. And so the great, what we were describing was sort of the great burden of these mosquito-borne viruses and their diseases in these communities where it really wasn't being tested, because oftentimes, and still today, when people in sub-Saharan Africa get a fever, people sometimes assume that it's malaria, but it could be a lot of other things, including these mosquito-borne viruses, arboviruses. And so we started to describe this great burden of infections and started to look at the risk factors, why people were getting sick, and then what the long-term health consequences were of Rift Valley fever or dengue, chikungunya, West Nile, many different viruses. And then I got the opportunity when I moved to Stanford about 6 years ago to write a grant where we actually intervened. So instead of just describing the problem, the terrible problem we had, we actually got to get our hands dirty and really try to prevent these infections. And so I was awarded a Bechtel Faculty Scholar Award to really do an intervention project in Kenya. And this intervention project we designed, it focused at the community level. So it was door to door with maternal and paternal heads of household in the community, but also there was a paired school-based program. And so we went into the schools and we taught children about the mosquito life cycle, about the fact that there are different types of mosquito that bite you at different types of days, different times of the day, and that they carry different diseases. And so we had created this beautiful curriculum. I worked with a PhD student at Stanford named Jenna Forsyth, who developed this great curriculum that was very engaging with the kids, and they had homework every day. And so on the first day, when we sent them out, we said, okay, now that we've shown you, what these mosquitoes look like, they look like little wormy things when they're in their larval stages, you go out into your communities and you find these mosquitoes, find where they are, and then come back and tell us. So the next day the kids came back, did you see these mosquitoes? Yeah, we found so many of them. And we said, well, where did you find them? And they said, in all the piles of plastic trash behind our homes. So Jenna and I looked at each other and we're like, oh boy. Okay. And at the time, we were also doing a lot of vector work. I work with incredible medical entomologists, Francis Machuku and Bryson and Dango, who are my main leads in Kenya. And so they were doing all this medical entomology work. And that at the same time was showing us that these sort of, piles of trash were really, really effective at breeding mosquitoes. So At that time, Jenna and I, we were faced with a decision, what could we do with all this trash? At the time, there's no formal recycling programs in Kenya, and it was either bury or burn it. And so we knew we didn't want to burn it, of course. And so we ended up repurposing as much of this trash as we could, using that repurposed plastic to grow up 4,000 native tree seedlings. The kids themselves, we asked them to do a big kind of school against school cleanup, community cleanup of this trash. They collected over a ton of plastic waste, over 17,000 containers, and we repurposed it, and then we ended up burying it. And so what happened then was we sort of started on this path like, we have a big problem here. We have all this plastic waste that is breeding mosquitoes, and now we need to do something about it. And so our work now is really focused on trying to get at this burden of plastic and try and decrease it and eliminate it before it can actually cause human health harm.
I really do.
Yeah, so our work has shown that by the time a person reaches adulthood, at least half of people are exposed to these viruses.
Wow.
About half of them are exposed to dengue, at least a third to chikungunya or alpha viruses like chick. And so people are getting exposed, and oftentimes, again, there's no testing in the health centers, and so they're often misdiagnosed as something else. And so it's the way you prevent these infections is preventing the bite from the vector, right? Unfortunately, we don't have any drugs. We don't have available vaccines. And so really the way that you prevent disease from these things is actually by what we call larval source reduction, or stopping mosquito breeding, right? These mosquitoes are really, really efficient transmitters of disease in the world. They like to bite humans preferentially. They like to live around our compounds. They love to breed in our plastic waste. It's their favorite place to breed. And so they've really adapted themselves to sort of the urban human environment. And so the only way you can really prevent the disease is by cleaning up all that trash and making it so that the mosquitoes are not in your backyard feeding on you. So Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, which are the mosquitoes I'm talking about right now, the ones that spread dengue and chikungunya, yellow fever, Zika, they prefer to breed in plastic containers, man-made plastic, for whatever reason, and they only need a tablespoon of water to breed. So you can imagine when you have all this plastic trash laying around, when it rains, right? All these containers fill with a little bit of water, and they act as this just really efficient sort of factory for mosquitoes. In fact, we've done mosquito trapping around some of the yard shops. So you have people in the informal plastic trade, which try and repurpose plastic in Kenya. And so we've done trapping, and we've collected more than 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour. So it's a lot of mosquitoes. And so you can imagine a lot of mosquitoes translates to increased risk for these infections, right?
Places.
I mean, so every place has their local flavor, right? But I mean, plastic pollution is a problem right here in the US, right? I mean, the problem is we don't have a lot of plastic alternatives at this point, right? And so we have this plastic, and it's building up and building up. And we know, I have this great picture that I show that's from Life magazine in the 1950s. And it's this picture of an American family with all these like disposable plastics, and they look really happy, and they're like, welcome to throwaway living. And it's true. I mean, this is what's happened since the 1950s. All of a sudden this plastic has been produced and produced and produced, millions of tons of plastic. By the time 2010 rolled around, it was 400 million tons of plastic produced per year, right? And this stuff doesn't biodegrade, right? It does not. It's not really recyclable, right? There's a lot of news coming out lately about big oil and kind of the, untold secrets about plastic and recycling, and the fact that, it's not all plastic is really fully recyclable. And those companies, although they're using oil to make all the plastic, right, the onus for what to do with the plastic got pushed to the consumer, right? Okay, now you go recycle it. But the recycling is not always that simple, and it's different in different parts of the world. Some places have greater capacity. In Kenya, there isn't any formal recycling. And so there is this incredible, because Kenyans, I mean, they're incredibly brilliant, innovative people, right? And so they come up with all sorts of ways to repurpose things, reuse things. And so there is an informal recycling trade in Kenya that we've tapped into. And lately we had a program where we had a little business incubator program to try and get more plastic off the street and generate more wealth and more economic opportunity using plastic in our places. We're hoping to do more and more of that. But in the end, the scale of the problem is worldwide, and plastic is piling up everywhere, right? And it really is becoming truly an environmental justice issue and a global health equity issue. Because again, in the news, as you see, back in 2000, I mean, you are a Chinese expert, right? Like that, since we used to just give China all of our plastic, right? And had them deal with our plastic, but they stopped taking it in 2016. And so now we're looking for other places to dump our plastic, which is not okay. And it's just becoming more and more of a problem. And of course, I'm in healthcare too, and the healthcare waste is a special problem, right? And also a problem that isn't getting effectively dealt with either. So there's a lot of work to do in this space, and I'm glad that it's getting more and more attention in the media, and that people are starting to pay attention to it, because as consumers, we can all, demand changes too to what's happening. In Kenya, actually, where we're at right now is these infections are becoming more and more prevalent and getting more and more attention in the media in Kenya and across sub-Saharan Africa. And so at this time, actually, in Kenya, there isn't actually any mosquito control that's directed to these infections. And so that's really the first step, thinking, okay, we've got a problem. We've been using bed nets to protect against malaria, because of course the malaria mosquito bites you at night, and that's why the bed net works. But these are day biting mosquitoes, so that's not going to work. So we can't fall back on bed nets. We have to do something else. We have to go forward with integrated vector control and try and treat a lot of these different vectors at the same time. So Kenya's in the position right now where they're starting. I was just in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, meeting with ministries of health, and they're starting to understand that this is a really important problem that's infecting their people and affecting health, and starting to think about vector control, and then also diagnosis in the health centers, right? Because you need the diagnosis to know exactly what's transmitting, so you can go back and do the appropriate vector control. So that's where we're at right now. I would say, as far as the plastic goes, Kenya is actually on the forefront, I feel like, worldwide when it comes to plastic. They banned plastic bags in 2016. It's like the most effective plastic ban bag ever. There used to be plastic blowing around all over the place. There's nothing. They enforce it a lot, like so much so that when I was landing a couple weeks ago into Kenya, they actually made an announcement as the plane was landing. If you have any plastic bags with you, leave them on the plane. If you're caught with a plastic bag, you will be prosecuted. And I was like, yeah. So it's really impressive. And they now have banned plastic water bottles in the game parks, which is incredible, right? So if you go to a game park, you get a glass bottle. And now there's legislation going through the parliament right now in Kenya where they're actually changing the responsibility again and actually forcing the producers of the plastic to pick up as much plastic as they produce, which is incredible, right? So they're putting the onus back on the industries that are making these plastics show up in the first place, instead of taking it off of the consumer, right? And so this is, the US could learn a lot from that. Yeah, so me and my teams and my partners in Kenya are just now launching a nonprofit called it's called HERI, H-E-R-I, which means sort of blessings in Swahili, but it stands for the Health and Environmental Research Institute Kenya. And it's a new nonprofit, and really what we want to do in this nonprofit, our goal is to translate the power of all the scientific knowledge that we've acquired over the years working in these systems into engaging messages that are really actionable in the community, right? Because what we want to do is improve health for both the planet and the people on it, right, in our communities. And so we are really starting to build community. Again, there's a lot of inspiring people in Kenya who are interested in sustainability and environmental health and so forth. And so we're building that community so that we can work together. And we're strengthening sort of our existing partnerships and really creating new partnerships across Kenya for really research and policy change in this area. And kind of as was mentioned with Arugia, right? Like the reason why they're so effective is because they're at the community level, using the community members, right, to actually change cultural norms and really like activate the power of the people, right? And really getting to that front line, and then also providing the data back to them to help guide their future motion, right? And so this is exactly what we're trying to do in our nonprofit as well. We want to educate and empower youth and the community members to really know about the dangers of trash. In our work, we've identified that people are not very aware that trash is a problem. They just sort of ignore it because it's been there for so long. And so they aren't empowered to change it, right? Because they don't really think it's a problem for their health. And so we need to educate and empower them, really harness all that brilliance and ingenuity, and then together with them, really start to create a culture, a plastic recycling culture in Kenya, right?
Yeah.
Where we change both the attitudes and the mindsets around trash, but then also the policies, right? Because policies drive a lot of what we do. We don't even realize how policy changes our world, right? And then in the
Yeah.
end, we're really hoping to remove a lot of plastic waste, right? So that we
Yeah.
can really clean up and protect people's health.
So what?
So this nonprofit, so I've been working in Kenya and visiting there since 2005. So over all of this time, this nonprofit is really sort of built on that long standing collaboration and relationships and trust and rapport and buy-in. So it's really, this work is happening by all the Kenyans that I've been working with for over the years. Like I'm just sort of a person in line with them helping out, right? It's really their work, and it's, they own it. And so I think that over the years in the research, we've really learned how to partner with all the different sort of stakeholders in the community, from the village elders and the religious leaders in the Kenyan village, all the way down to like, the really invested grandmothers and maternal heads of household. I mean, you really have to get everyone on board and buy in, right? And a lot of the people who work on my teams in Kenya, of course, it's all Kenyans. And so they're part of the community because they are the community, they live there. And so we already have a lot of those challenges sort of eased up a little bit for us, just because of this long standing relationship and trust and rapport that we've built over time. And so yeah, so we actually, I wrote a grant. We'll see if I get the funding to do this, but there is a group actually based out of the UK that has developed an anaerobic digestion bacterial fuel cell. So what this is,
Wow.
So it turns out in 2016, they identified a new bacterium called Salmonella idiensis, which is actually a bacterium that naturally eats plastic as a food source. So plastic is made from oil, so locked in that plastic is a ton of biologic energy, right? And so, but breaking those bonds is very difficult. And so this bacterium has figured out a way, and there are a few others, has figured out a way to actually eat plastic for life, okay? And so this it's called an anaerobic digestion unit. What it is it has these bacterial fuel cells with Eikenella in it, and you can actually put PET plastic, which is a non-valuable kind of single-use water bottle plastic, into it, and the bacteria chew that up, and then they create two things. They create a fertilizer that's super bio-rich that you can use on your crops, and then they also create a methane-rich biogas that can be harnessed for energy production. And so this is a great idea, right? It's just one other idea of a circular economy of waste, right? Like you have the waste, it looks like it's not worth anything, actually it could be worth something, and we could use it, to power a lot of things. I visited a place on the west coast in Kenya, on the shores of Lake Victoria, where people are using a similar unit, which uses vegetable or food waste, not PET plastic, but uses food waste to create this biogas. And then that's harnessed to actually run cook stoves in the homesteads of people. And that's wonderful because number one, you're not chopping down trees for charcoal. And number two, there's no emittance from the burning of the logs, right? So that people have much less air pollution and asthma and lung conditions. And so there's a lot of different things that we can do, and we just all need to do them. So I think it comes down to listening. I don't know, might not be the answer you're looking for, but as far as I'm concerned, It seems to me when I was in Kenya a few weeks back, I was meeting with a lot of different people in this space, and there's a lot going on. People running zero waste farms, people getting doing policy activism work to try and change and make Kenya more environmentally sustainable and so forth. And so I think really sitting down with people and kind of telling them what you are, who you are, what your real interests are and your drivers, and then hearing from them the same, and then just finding those places of overlap where we both can imagine we can work together with a kind of a shared vision, and then following through, right? Actually doing what you say you're going to do, and no more, no less, like really being actively engaged with people. I think it's the way to go, right? And again, because this is really a Kenya-led nonprofit, all of those people on the ground also have built relationships with all sorts of people. And so you just build off of those networks, I think, and then continue to sort of move the dial to a better world together, right? How much time do you have? Yes. Okay. So first, I just want to say that I actually very much believe in individual choice as a way to change the world. There's that Margaret Mead quote, which is like my favorite quote ever, which is something like, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. Like, I really live and breathe this, right? And so I actually think that every single choice that we make every single day impacts. And I think we don't pay attention to it, right? So I think it's about getting intentional with your choices. So when you say, what can we do? Like, yes, don't get that plastic straw, because it's going to end up like in some baby sea turtle, right? And you don't need it anyway. Don't buy plastic water bottles, right? Plastic water bottle. Everybody can have a reusable water bottle, right? Like, I actually look at plastic water bottles now, and I get like, it causes like a somatic reaction in my body, because I know what those bottles do, right? There's lots of different types of plastic, and some plastic is recyclable, can be reused, is thicker, is repurposed, but these single-use plastics are horrible, right? So for instance, in my family, like I have 3 young children, and we haven't bought, plastic Ziplocs for years now. I think maybe 4 years we're going on. And people are like, well, how do you even do that? Well, it turns out everything comes in plastic, right? Plastic, you buy a bag of bread and there's plastic bag there. We just use those instead, right? So single-use plastic doesn't have to be single-use, and you can actually make choices every single day to avoid using it, right? I also think there's a lot of movement right now in zero waste. When I was in Kenya, again, I visited, I work on the Kenyan coast at one of my sites, and it's a beautiful place on the Indian Ocean where, and that's where our nonprofit is based as well. And, the impact of plastic on the ocean is huge, right? And so there's a big hotel there where they have been zero waste now for 4 years. They have an entire farm that's completely sustainable. They reuse everything. And the point is, like, this is how the world should be. Like, why aren't we doing this? So it's like, we need alternatives to plastic. We need to research those. We need to fund those, right? But we already have a lot of these solutions. At Stanford, there are a lot of people who work in ocean plastics. And I was actually at a meeting one night, and I was sitting next to one of these like big oceans people. And we were talking about the ocean's plastic. And he said, we've actually got the solutions to clean up the ocean's plastic. It's just that no one wants to pay for it. And so that's heartbreaking, right? Because you think like, oh, this is a big problem. We don't know how to solve it. Actually, we know how to solve it. It's just like, we need to figure out who's accountable. We're all accountable, and then actually act and do something about it. At right now, I see that Barb Ernie is on the line. Yeah. I'm working with Barb at the Shannon Parker Center at Stanford is starting a new climate change and equity task force that I get to work with Barb on. And so we're really trying to figure out, like, how can we translate the research into policy? How can we change local policy, global policy? How can we educate medical professionals, as when they're students and older, like so that they can know that this is a problem, understand how climate change impacts health and so forth. And so I think there are probably many different people in many different roles on this call, but like everyone can figure out how they're powerful in their roles and how they can start being intentional about their choices, proselytize it to the world so people understand why you're doing what you're doing, and then bring along others, right? Because this is a problem that we all have to deal with, and we're not going to do it alone, right? We all need to get together and really work on it together. So a great way is I have a website, which is LaBeaud Lab at Stanford. As far as the nonprofit goes, we are HERI-Kenya.org. I can put it in the chat actually. So if people
Okay.
want to look up and just get involved, like please, I would love it if everyone on the call wants to be part of the HERI Village and wants to get involved with this nonprofit. And we really are trying to create circular economies as part of that nonprofit. So it would be wonderful.